Good afternoon. My name is Zeblon Vilakazi. I'll be chairing the session on which is session 9A, plenary session 4, stream 1, on the implications of community-based learning and community-led research for the engaged university. This is part, of course, of the main plenaries of the second USAf Higher Education Conference, which aims to provide a platform for reflection and vigorous evidence-based robust engagements. It offers a space for a diverse set of voices to be heard and to inform and shape our future imaginations in the space of universities as social institutions that have to be responsive whilst advancing knowledge. In this way, the conference hopes to draw together our current contextual realities while opening up uncharted territories for a desired future. The objectives that we need to address are provision of the national platform for rigorous academic debate, as I mentioned earlier, and deliberation on the pertinent higher education issues informed by the work of USAf's strategic structures and programs. Secondly, to encourage and support solutions building through facilitated dialogues such as this, and inquiry as key stakeholders and role players. Third, to provide an opportunity for information sharing and networking across a broad array within the public higher educational sector and related sectors in the post-secondary educational system. And finally, to identify and agree on a set of goals for the sector and subsequent concrete actions that will ensue from these deliberations in order to advance and realize the engaged university. It's most apposite that this session has members who have had a track record of being involved in this space of working with communities as part of driving their research agenda. We've got 3 speakers for the session today. Professors Mosoetsa, Tracy-Lynn, and Monique, more about whom I will talk when I introduce their sessions. So with that, I'll open up for the first part of the session, which is a presentation, about 15 minutes, with about 20 minutes, 5 minutes of Q&A, which are collected by the technical moderators, who are Dr. Johnson. She will forward the questions in the Q&A sessions. A reminder again for the presenters to mute their chat box, and so that you just have only the Q&A that will be, whose questions will be fielded and forwarded to us by Dr. Johnson. With that, I'd like to hand over to speaker number 1, Professor Sarah Mosoetsa, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the National Accident, and also an Associate Professor in the School of Social Sciences, Department of Sociology at the University of the Witwatersrand. Over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Professor Zeblon, and thank you so much for being invited to participate in this conference. It is greatly appreciated. I think for me, it is also greatly appreciated that the NIHSS is invited to interact, and I appreciate that you have a physicist also who's Vice-Chancellor as well, who's chairing this session. So let me start with disclaimers, and I want to do 5 disclaimers so that we put in context my input for today. The first disclaimer is that I do agree, and I am a firm supporter of knowledge for its own sake. So a lot of theorizing still needs to be done, especially from the South. 2, blue sky research, again, I think it is important. Forecasting, I think, is important in our world, in the universities and the world over. The third one is that I know, and again, I want to support the idea that universities are already fulfilling their part of the work. So they are teaching and they're building the next generation of scholars. We can only just look at the number of Black female PhD graduates that have been increasing in the last 5 years. 4 is that university rankings, reluctantly, I want to also support that they have their place in our world, maybe even in our continent. 5 is that the 5 disclaimer, and it will be the last disclaimer, is that universities have also done very well in a context where there are competing pressures of funding and the kind of scholarship that our students are also asking us to do, but also the demands of fundraising and funders and what they are also demanding. But having said all of those, that the 5 disclaimers, I want to maybe challenge us to think about what would be relevant in the context of South Africa, and what would be this community, what would be the benefits of this community-led research. I want to suggest that we should, for a socially engaged university, pursue particular kinds of research and agendas through community-relevant led research. This will be research that I know would be rooted in our context, responding to challenges currently facing us as a country and as a continent: inequalities, rising unemployment, and many other social ills. And I don't want to even list all of them. The purpose of my at least 10-minute, 15-minute input is based on our recent research that we've conducted in three intervals and unique in their own way, but they are also related. The first one is research that we've done under lockdown. We've termed this townships under lockdown. What have been the experiences of townships under lockdown in responding to a health crisis that we also now know and appreciate the role of HIV? It has not just been a health crisis, it is an economic and often political and social crisis. The second project that I want to draw from is our research on religious communities and their responses to COVID-19. Finally, I think I also want to anchor my input on, again, the recent research around community unrest, and we often talk about the unrest, civil unrest that happened in KZN and Gauteng. So on the first one, there are 2 things that I want to draw from in terms of this, the importance of community-led and relevant research. Right? Townships under lockdown, there are 2 things that I think for us have been very important in thinking through what universities could do more of, could support more of. First is that community-based research for us has been important, and this research has shown that if we link research to policy interventions, then we are able to get to the point, the better solutions, not even better solutions, just solutions quicker. That we will immediately or much sooner, quicker, respond to challenges, not just as health challenges. So we only bring certain scientists in the room, but we bring everyone. And in that instance, we understand that under lockdown, townships under lockdown, the livelihoods have been undermined, but new livelihoods have also been created. Second, which is something that I've been looking at very closely, is that we also negate certain assumptions. For example, the one assumption is that households are not are always harmonious sites that work for the benefit of all. We know now with our research that townships under lockdown, that households are contentious spaces, and that is why some people were surprised that of the rising, escalating number incidents of gender-based violence, precisely because we started with the false assumption that households are there for the benefit of all, and they will always work in sustaining livelihoods, from economic livelihoods to social livelihoods. The second research research communities, on religious communities and COVID-19, for us again, emphasize the importance of community-led research, that other than government, these religious communities, and you know, it's broad, and it's not just religious, it's community-based organizations play an important role in a context where there's a lot of uncertainty, and uncertainty around livelihoods, uncertainty around health. And however, especially around religious communities, that we quickly realized that with passing the COVID and numbering how many people have been infected and how many people have passed on, unfortunately, there's also evidence that there was vaccine hesitance, and we are living through that now. And I suppose if we ignore community-based or community-led research, we do that at our own peril, and this is what we are experiencing with certain sectors being very reluctant to be vaccinated and certain population. The last one that I want to draw on is our research on the recent unrest and particularly in KZN and Gauteng. That there is a need for us as a country, while we are balancing health crisis, we always at all material times need to also balance livelihoods, securing livelihoods, because these are not individuals who are simply saying, I want to be healthy all the time. They also want to feed their families. They also want to lead a different life. And for them, leading a different life doesn't just mean health. It also means other imperatives, living in a community, living in a household where there's harmony, right? But I think more importantly around the unrest for us, what that research revealed is that rising inequality and unemployment are sources of instability, not politics, and not necessarily who is jailed or who's not jailed, but rather the source of the crisis is rising inequality and unemployment. I said I was going to be brief, and I want to conclude by saying a few, maybe two things. That if you take what HSS has at least contributed and is contributing, and many of us and other spaces, I classify myself as a sociologist, we've been talking about the importance of public sociology, making sure that, or at least making the argument that universities need to open themselves up to engaging with their immediate communities through research and many other things. And this is not just for the sake of us counting how many units this publication is going to yield for the university or for the individual, but for social change. But what is required is that universities, and I want to challenge universities, that behind the high walls of universities, almost creating enclaves of security complexes, aloof and almost ivory tower, that what we urgently require, I think is more of the university that engages with its immediate community. Because there are some universities that can be easily be shielded from pursuing such an agenda, precisely because of the localities. There are universities in this country that cannot ignore, because their immediate community is right there in front of them. So think about the many universities that are in poor, placed inside poor communities, poor municipalities, the rural areas, who don't have the luxury of not pursuing a community-led research that leads to social change. Finally, again, I want maybe to just push boundaries a bit and talk about the need to shift or even achieving that balance, that equilibrium between pursuing or chasing narrow impact factors and rankings to thinking about social relevance and maybe even thinking about something called social impact. I want to close it at that and maybe allow for discussion and to also hear my colleagues. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. I don't know, Bernadette, whether are there any questions that have come through?
Has any questions come through?
Not at this stage. Prof. Thanks.
Okay, but are there any, I mean, does anyone have a question for Prof. Mosoetsa? Just whilst we're gathering our thoughts, and I'm sure that the questions will accumulate, and I mean, you could even do a cumulative Q&A at the end when other presentations have been had. But I think you spoke about vaccine hesitancy, and the question I'd ask you is, what is the role, I mean, in your research, what is the role of access to data without the specialist filtering of the data? Because now you can access information without the expert interpretation, and that subjects itself to all the misinterpretations, and especially on matters which are premised, I mean, for the want of better expression, on hard scientific facts like causality between vaccination and mortality. That is clear that, you know, vaccination is something that has clear evidence through peer review, which the public does not have access to, with all the control studies and randomized tests and so on and so forth. And that becomes very hard to articulate. So, but people read those, have access to those nowadays. So how do you, what has your research revealed on that front?
Zeblon, I think there's Professor Vilakazi. I think these are important questions that we're grappling with. One thing that I know from the studies is that yes, there's causality, and it is what you and I can talk about, and hard facts. However, vaccines, and this is what we missed when we started with this conversation around vaccines. Vaccines also are occur in a social context. And people attach meaning to even being vaccinated around something as dangerous as COVID-19. So the meanings that they attach to vaccine, that's what we need to understand. Because if we understand that meaning, we are able to come back and say, okay, let's address those social, even myths, right? I also think that myths are an important way of understanding where communities are sitting, and dispelling some of those myths. Remember, we have experience with something like this when ARVs came in the market. We needed to fully understand. I think we made a simple calculation, very scientific, and I don't discount that at all, that when there's a vaccine and when we are saying it's good for you, people will naturally gravitate towards that. Let me also be controversial, because it's an open space, I think, with colleagues. It also depends on who's driving the message around vaccine. Now, 2021 is the year of the election in South Africa. Very political year in many ways. And who drives the message around vaccine will always be loaded with, why should we trust you? We didn't trust you with paving our roads. We didn't trust you with unemployment. Why should we trust you with something as delicate as our lives? So it is hesitancy, I agree with it, but there is also a lot of politicking around it at the grassroots level that we need to understand. Thank you.
With that, then we will come back to you at the end of the session. When you have time, I'll come to Tracy-Lynn.
Thank you.
Tracy is the research, is a Claude Leon Foundation professor, research professor in Earth Justice and Stewardship, Climate Change, and the Engaged University. So Tracy, and also Tracy is a professor of law in the School of Law at the University of the Witwatersrand.
Thank you so much, Zeblon. I'm just going to share my screen. So good afternoon, VCs, Deputy VCs, Professor Bawa, distinguished guests, and other distinguished speakers. My thanks to USAf and the Conference Committee for entrusting me with this semi-plenary address. And the title of my presentation today is Universities and the Great Sustainability Transformation Towards a New Vision of Community Engagement. And by sustainability, I don't mean whether DHET subsidies are going to increase or decrease, or how much the teaching curriculum exactly is going to go online. I have in mind the sustainability of the systems that ensure we have clean water to drink and air to breathe, a climate that does not lurch from one extreme to the other, and our continued positioning in a web of life. So my aim today is to bring the modalities of engagement around sustainability on the one hand and community on the other into closer proximity in the context of an overarching question: how do we lead the sustainability transformation? And by we, I have in mind the 26 public institutions of higher learning represented at this conference, but bearing in mind that each institution is itself a type of communities with a myriad of linkages to other external interest groups. So my question around sustainability and community is really a question of scale. At what scale should we constitute community for a sustainability transformation? To achieve this aim, I'm going to firstly speak briefly about the urgency of a sustainability transformation. I would then like to reflect on how we typically respond to questions of sustainability on the one hand and community engagement on the other. In the third part of my presentation, I simply want to flag what seem to me to be emerging nodes of leadership and excellence in tying sustainability transformation to community, to the university as a community, and to the university as an actor within a situated spatial ecological community. Finally, I throw the gauntlet down to USAf, challenging this community of communities to consider whether there is scope for a node of enhanced cooperation around the sustainability transformation. So allow me to speak briefly about this sustainability transformation and the complex and rapid changes that are underway in an effort to make a case for urgency. Our Earth is not necessarily dying, but it is changing in a way that will not allow humanity and large swathes of humanity and billions of non-human organisms to adapt quickly enough to a different kind of home. I could speak about global warming and the certainty of a drier and hotter future, especially here in Southern Africa. And this is a picture from the Amatole district in the Eastern Cape. That climate change is widespread, rapid, intensifying, and unprecedented in thousands of years. That even with best effort mitigation measures in the 2020s, it is more likely than not that a 1.5 degrees threshold that defines dangerous levels of climate change will be exceeded in the early 2030s. I could speak about what this means in terms of the food energy nexus and tipping points, especially here in Southern Africa. I could also speak about biodiversity loss and ecosystem degradation. In a foreword to the 2021 Dasgupta review on the economics of biodiversity, Sir David Attenborough leads with the following stark warning. We are facing a global crisis. We are totally dependent upon the natural world. It supplies us with every oxygen-laden breath and every mouthful of food we eat, but we are currently damaging it so profoundly that many of its natural systems are now on the verge of breakdown. I could speak about a 2020 study published by the Swiss Re Institute, which evaluated the global state of biodiversity loss and ecosystem decline for reinsurance purposes at a square kilometer scale. The red areas in this map indicate where biodiversity and ecosystem services are comparatively fragile, and any further use could accelerate a decline. As you can see from this map, the whole of Southern Africa is in a precarious position. Finally, I could speak about the tidal wave of polluting organic and man-made substances that are soiling our nest. And this is where I would like to pause. With the possible exception of the sewage choking many of South Africa's rivers, the problem with pollution and waste is that its pathways are so incremental and insidious, we hardly notice we are beginning to drown in poison and filth. At times, there is an event where the release of these substances into the environment is so spectacular and devastating that it confronts, makes everyone stand up and take notice, and can tip the scales in favor of a regime change. The looting-initiated fire at a chemical warehouse in Cornubia, north of Durban in July this year, may prove to be such an event. Millions of liters and thousands of tons of pesticides, insecticides, herbicides, and fungicides that provide agricultural crop solutions for our food security went up in flames. They were being stored by a multinational company in a largely unlicensed facility in the middle of a densely populated region and close to a sensitive estuarine and coastal environment. When the beleaguered municipal fire department hosed the fire down, they were unaware that chemicals of this nature were being stored at the facility and unintentionally transported the chemical cocktail down the Umhlanga River, essentially wiping out this ecosystem. In a presentation last Sunday, Environment Minister Barbara Creasy described this event and the danger it has posed to human health, the environment, and livelihoods as unprecedented in South Africa's history. 3,000 tons of dead fish, 13,000 tons of solid waste, and 23 million litres of contaminated liquids, the latter destined for a landfill site in Gauteng, have been removed from the site. The incident is instructive not only for the scale of environmental devastation that has been wreaked, but also for exposing the power relationships that underlie the current unsustainable state of affairs. This event is also a useful bridge to the second part of my presentation, which focuses on how we do community engagement and sustainability. Within a week of the Cornubia events, a community of sorts came together. Individual academics from WITS, DUT, UKZN, and UJ, together with some established environmental NGOs and an attorney who lives in the area. We've styled ourselves the UPL Cornubia Fire Civil Society Action Group and have played a critical role by timeously applying a pressure on the authorities in the company, engaging with the media, and coordinating community groups across the socioeconomic spectrum to do the same. This is Kira Owen from DUT, who chairs our meetings. But how would the academics who are part of this group fit the significant contribution of their time and energy within their university's value framework? Most obviously, the academics concerned are contributing to community engagement, but even so, they are not doing it in an obvious way. The model of community engagement in public institutions is an institutionalized and embedded one, geared toward universities working in partnership with communities for mutual benefit through the modalities of service learning, volunteerism, perhaps work-integrated learning, consultancies, and perhaps longer-term research projects. In a 2016 article on the Porous University, Julia Priest outlines how the notion of community engagement has been reconceptualized since the early 1990s, as universities have become increasingly marketized, focusing on income generation and productivity in the form of publications and research output, and competing fiercely to achieve rankings in the global marketplace. Alongside these changes, the service dimension of university functioning has shifted from individual acts of philanthropy to an embedded institutional response to addressing community needs. The discourse shifted from service to engagement in institutional strategic plans and policies. This terminological change also reflected an ideological shift towards the partnership and mutual benefit model. At face value, this sounds great as a foundation for community engagement for a sustainability transformation, but I believe there is a more evolved version. So almost all of the 26 public institutions of higher learning, and I spent time this past month just going through all the websites and the strategic plans and visions and mission statements, almost all these institutions have a policy on community engagement or include it in their value or mission statement. Almost all have institutionalized community engagement in some form, whether as a standalone officer or a manager. And the vast majority of South African higher education institutions belong to global CE organizations like the Talwar Network. Yet it is curious to me that only a handful of institutions link this institutionally embedded community engagement to the imperative of a sustainability transformation. How then do we do sustainability? Tristan McGowan, whom you heard yesterday, has developed a theoretical framework to understand how universities impact climate change. And for the purposes of this presentation, I'm extending this to a sustainability transformation more generally. So based on an understanding of the 5 modalities of the university, he's proposed a number of pathways. And these pathways include the idea of accommodating community in both an external and an internal sense. Universities can provide a service directly to a community or engage in advocacy, campaigning, or mobilization. And they can also alter their own internal institutional functioning. But this is not the dominant way that we, the public higher education sector, tend to engage with questions of sustainability. It is far more likely for the predominant pathway to be through research, first and foremost, and then possibly through teaching, perhaps a few green campus initiatives, or more recently attempts to garner council support for fossil fuel divestment campaigns. The leading institutions in the sustainability sphere are our research institutions, with a few having flagship outfits like UCT's Future Water Institute, Stellenbosch's School of Climate Studies, WITS Global Change Institute, that produce knowledge for society, but not necessarily with or in community. So I'm therefore left wondering how community can be refracted through the sustainability lens in a far more prominent way, whether through galvanizing individual universities behind a common sustainability transformation challenge, refocusing the work of the existing institutional architecture for community engagement, or creating an enduring node for inter-university cooperation on sustainability. In my recent survey of community engagement and sustainability, I was interested in the institutions that seem to be trying to bring these two things closer together. And for purposes of my presentation today, I want to flag two of these institutions. Interestingly, they both hail from the Eastern Cape, which has been ravaged by a multi-year drought since 2015. So the first example is my alma mater, Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University, where I studied music about 30 years ago. Almost all the 2030 strategic visions, so everyone seems to have a 2030 strategic vision, but Nelson Mandela University stands out for me for its unequivocal centering of the sustainability crisis and the breadth of its understanding of it. The vision, for example, recognizes the overlapping crises of climate change, resource scarcity, biodiversity loss, pollution, and exceeding critical limits. It recognizes that sustainability is non-negotiable and commits to harnessing the university's research excellence behind a university-wide transformation project. The take-home for me is the priority NMMU appears to be giving to environmental stewardship, which is critical to galvanizing a university-wide response. My second example is Rhodes University. Rhodes has a well-established community engagement program, and they recently won an important award for one of their mentoring programs. But it is not this, but rather their Vuka Makana campaign that caught my eye. This campaign situates Rhodes as a coordinator of civic action. It calls on the citizens of Makana to fight for the betterment of the city and encompasses the full suite of SDG goals, including sustainability. It provides a platform where residents can log the hours they have contributed, in effect establishing the basis for a form of social currency in the community. And I wondered whether it is because these institutions are already sitting in the crucible of a climate crisis, and in the case of Rhodes, the severely deteriorated service delivery situation in Makana, that they are taking action. In a video of extreme weather events posted on the Guardian site in July 2021, there is a clip of a man commenting on uncontrollable wildfires in California. And this really, it sits with me because he said, we hear reports on this saying, oh, poor people, it's horrible. But when you are with them, experiencing the same thing, it gives you a different outlook on life. It gives you a different outlook on compassion. And this to me is the evolved model of community engagement that we need to pursue for a sustainability transformation. And it resonates with the statement on Rhodes University's site. The pandemic has highlighted the need for all of us to be socially responsible, to take care of ourselves and care for others, be responsible for ourselves and be responsible for others. The current discourse on the reimagination of higher education reflects the lexicon of community engagement. The purpose of higher education institutions is for the public good, social and civic responsibility, care and compassion, community development. This emphasis on social responsibility and compassion seems to be an evolved version of the extant community engagement model of mutual benefit and partnership, and I believe it is worthy of emulation. So I've argued today for universities leading the way in a sustainability transformation through an evolved form of community engagement centered on social responsibility, care and compassion. And I've offered two examples of institutions that seem to me to be expanding the scale of a community sustainability nexus. In conclusion, I throw down the gauntlet in the spirit of an igniting conversation. And what about upping the scale of sustainability community engagement through an inter-university platform of engagement on environmental stewardship? USAf is playing an incredibly important role, and this amazing conference program is testimony to that. The streams of cooperation on teaching and learning, research and innovation, transformation, the world of work and funding. But where does sustainability fit in this architecture? Where, for that matter, does community engagement fit? Is this not perhaps time for a new community of practice that can coordinate, monitor, encourage, and steer the centering of sustainability in the university's mission? As we move to reimagine the university in a post-COVID-19 world, I would suggest that the time is now. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy-Lynn. I think the question that actually has been posted here is trust and relationship building should be a foundation to a community development before starting any research. I found the principles of community engagement provided in participative action, learning, and action research valuable. Trying to understand that. Can you please elaborate? Can you respond to that?
I'd like to elaborate. Thank you, Zeblon. So, you know, what governs the principle? What is the principal basis for engagement here? And I'd like to cite the work of my co-chair, Professor Craig Sheridan, who has a project in Svetla, north in Alex, which is about building a wetland to deal with grey water in the community. And the engineering is simple. What has been difficult over a period of 3 years is gaining the trust of this community. And that is where most of the interesting researchers come out. He's partnered with Andrew Thatcher in the School of Psychology. So there is this, what I call the octopus teacher principle. I don't know if you have seen this documentary. It won an Oscar, but it's about the story of a man who comes to visit an octopus every single day for a year. And that is the level of engagement and sticking power that we are going to need in our communities as we try and move forward in this sustainability transformation, which is actually an existential threat.
Wonderful. Great. I think the last time I saw an octopus on TV was during the FIFA World Cup in South Africa that had clairvoyance for predicting the scores. So I think we watched that one. We just have time for one more question. Just a question, is that not because these two universities that you spoke about, you correctly point out that they're in a place that is extremely facing severe pressure. So would that not be a case of necessity being a mother of invention?
Absolutely, but I think there's also scope, and the other principle is that in the ecosystem of universities, every player has their part to play. We can't all be the same, but we can learn from each other, and that is why an inter-university platform to me makes a lot of sense. Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Tracy-Lynn. We just have done our 20 minutes. Then we move to the last speaker, that is Professor Monique Marks. Just a few remarks about her work. Just bear with me for a sec. Professor Monique Marks is the head of Urban Futures Center, UFC, at the Durban University of Technology. And she will talk about the implications of community-based research for the engaged university, as we said earlier. Here, she'll focus on the tale of two Durban spaces. Given the presentation that was made earlier by Tracy-Lynn, we look forward to hearing the reflections from Professor Marks, because there's a nice thread that links the two there. Thank you. Thanks, over to you.
Thanks, Prof. Vilakazi. And I just wanted to make a quick comment that, you know, Tracy was talking about the interlinked nature of us as humans to one another and also to our Earth systems. And it would be very remiss of me not to note the interlinking of my panelists, my co-panelists, maybe by chance, to the work that we do at the Urban Future Center. Firstly, to Sarah from the NIHSS, that has been a supporter of the Urban Future Center through their catalytic funding, which we've been a recipient of and are very grateful for. And it was somewhat amusing, Tracy-Lynn, to see Kira Irwin's photo in your presentation, who is my colleague and has been for the past 10 years across universities. And that is largely because of her commitment to engaged research. And of course, sitting next to me is Professor Amit Bauer, who was responsible for establishing the Urban Future Centre, which I will talk about in a minute. The presentation that I'm going to give today is really about showcasing how community engagement or engaged research benefits universities. And I'm going to do this through two different projects that the Urban Future Centre has been involved in. There are many, but I'm going to talk about two, because I think it is critical for universities to contemplate what it is that they gain from these kinds of projects. I don't think it should be assumed that universities know this. Sorry, I'm just timing myself quickly. Oh gosh, sorry. This is me trying to get myself done. Okay, I'm going to leave that. So just to talk about the Urban Future Centre quickly, it was established, as I've said, by Professor Bauer when he was the Vice-Chancellor of the Durban University of Technology. And there were three things that come to mind when I think about the Urban Future Centre and its establishment that Professor Bauer wanted. The one was that it is a centre of research excellence, obviously focusing on issues of the urban. The second was that it would be engaged to the extent that it would lead to the improvement of quality of life, and particularly for urban dwellers. And the third, which is something that some presenters have spoken about yesterday and again today, is that it would be about imagining forward in ways that are not limited by the present. And it's with that understanding, which Professor Bauer had of the Urban Future Centre, that we began to go forward with our work. So I wanted to begin by dispelling two myths. Sarah spoke about disclosures, and I'm talking about dispelling myths, and perhaps it's because we both have been trained at WITS that we think so similarly and we begin in this way. But the first one is that community engagement deflects from research excellence and university rating status. And I'm hoping that in the presentation that I give, and when I talk about the projects that I'm presenting, that you will see that in fact, embedded and engaged research actually improves the kinds of research outputs that we have, because they are so empirically based, and that they also have meaning to the people, the places, the spaces that they are about. And it's that real engagement with the empirical and with the real life that really gives engaged research, I think, the gravitas that it does need. And that is, as Sarah said before, not to deter from research that is not applied. The second one is that there seems to be this kind of idea that social sciences don't have a laboratory, that society is not a laboratory. And I want to say that for me, that is totally not true. That it's in society, it's in the realm of the social, that we deliberate, that we knowledge build, that we experiment, and from our experiments, we build models. And from those models, we begin again to have public discourse and to change existing dominant narratives. And then, perhaps if we are lucky, we are able to remodel, to replicate, and to continue with this iterative process within the social. I'm going to turn now to the first tale, which was understanding social housing in Durban's largest low-income housing estate. And I want to talk a bit about how each of these projects began, what we did very, very quickly, and how they benefit the universities. So this project began when I was still based in community development at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. And it was a very strange thing to me that I was based in a community development program that had no engaged research project. This was in 2010. And so what happened then is that the head of school said, please, can you find a place that we can begin to do some kind of engagement research? It wasn't very difficult to find, because on the doorstep of the university, literally, was this place called Kenneth Gardens, which is Durban's largest low-income housing estate. A lot of research had been done at UKZN in so-called resource-poor areas, which were predominantly townships, but none of them had been done in the actual vicinity of the university, which I thought was really strange. And so really what happened is for us in the community development program to say, how do we engage with this direct community in which we are located, and to find possibilities in our surroundings. Kenneth Gardens, as you will see, shares exactly the same view, which is of the harbour, as does Howard College, in which I was based at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. And I show this just because I want to show proximity. So what it embedded me in as we started to work in Kenneth Gardens, and I'm talking about we because it was both myself and Dr. Kira Irwin who were involved in this process. First, it was the proximity and the neighborliness that that meant that we were embedded. And just by the way, I live in the same community as Kenneth Gardens is based in, and Kira actually grew up for part of her life in Kenneth Gardens. But what we did as researchers that were embedded is that we got involved in the daily life, the daily struggles, the resource building and the storytelling of Kenneth Gardens over a period of 10 years. And what we did is to co-create knowledge with our with the members of the Kenneth Gardens community by sharing public platforms, by developing oral histories, by forming outlets in the media to profile Kenneth Gardens, and by doing a number of different projects with young people in Kenneth Gardens. This is Kenneth Gardens at dawn, and I'm just showing it because it is both alive and dilapidated. What we did is we used research to establish needs and then to respond to them. So I'm just going to give you an idea of how we did this. We found out very quickly that there was a deficit in healthcare, and our response to that, through mobilizing the resources at DUT, which is not the university we were based at the time, was to get DUT homeopathic clinic into Kenneth Gardens. This was in about 2013. They are still operative in Kenneth Gardens today. Secondly, there were young people who were saying that they were not digitally literate. And so what we got is DUT's information technology graduate students to run digital-based literacy courses with young people in Kenneth Gardens. School youth said that they were disengaged from society. And so, and I'll explain this a bit more later, is we got our own students to pair up with a group of students who visited from Virginia Commonwealth University to do a photo voice project, in which they were able to talk about how they located themselves in their community. And the other thing is that Kenneth Gardens residents realized that they were unknown. They were a hidden people, a hidden community. And what we did then is to try to document the history and the lived realities of people in Kenneth Gardens by collating oral histories over a period of a number of years. I'm just showing this picture because it shows the intimacy of home that both Kira and I were invited to. This is a prayer service for one of the people whose stories is in our oral history book, who died. And I think inviting us into this inside space gives an indication of the intimacy of the researchers. There were a number of, and I'm saying this because I think it's important to know that it doesn't compromise research to be an engaged researcher or to be somebody committed to community engagement. These are two books that came out of the Kenneth Gardens project, one published by UKZN Press, the other one published by Virginia Commonwealth University. So what were the benefits of this particular project to the university, which at one point was UKZN and later on was DUT, as I moved to DUT and so did Kira? Firstly, it provided a space for student internships in the real world through homeopathy, through food nutrition, through those community development students that were involved in the Photo Voice project and so on. It created an opportunity for volunteerism, building this notion of global citizenship amongst our students and other academic staff. It allowed for empirically strong and socially relevant research outcomes, both in books, which I've shown, and in peer-reviewed articles, partnerships with community-based organizations, and with them we have long-term MOUs still activated between Kenneth Gardens and the university and other NGOs that became involved with us. Joined up projects with international universities, Virginia Commonwealth and Berkeley in the US being two examples of this. We got significant funding from the NRF Community Engagement Fund brought into the university and substantive media coverage. The second flagship project that I want to talk about, and in many ways, this is the Urban Future Centre's flagship engagement project, and I think to some extent even I could say DUT's flagship project, is called the Belhaven Harm Reduction Center. And this began as an initiative at the beginning of COVID-19 lockdown in level 5, when the deputy mayor approached the Urban Future Center together with a public health NGO called Advanced Access and Delivery to assist in developing what was called a withdrawal management program for homeless people during lockdown level 5. The deputy mayor then, Belinda Scott, recognized that there would be many people going into forced withdrawal from heroin. And she asked us to please establish what was then a medical and psychosocial program for people who were in these lockdown facilities. This is a photograph of people, 260 people who lived for 10 weeks in the underground parking lot of Moses Mabhida Stadium, which is where we established this withdrawal management program. The withdrawal management program, I think we've missed one slide, then later on was formalized into what is now called the Belhaven Harm Reduction Center. The Belhaven Harm Reduction Center was launched in June last year. And what it offers is a number of services. I'm just going to run through them. Daily Observed Methadone Program. What methadone is, for those that don't know, it's an opiate substitute which helps to deal with the withdrawals and for the long-term maintenance of quality of life for people that have a heroin use disorder. We run a needle syringe program from Belhaven Harm Reduction Center, which prevents the onward transmission of bloodborne illnesses. We provide basic medical services to homeless people. By the way, this facility is for the purposes of dealing with the health of homeless and low-income people who use drugs. We do testing, referral, and provision of medication for TB and HIV, home-based care for peers who require support for chronic medication. And then, of course, we have psychosocial services that are offered and very specific services for women who require access to psychosocial and medical facilities. It is a very low threshold community center, which means that there are almost no barriers to access, and that allows for improvement of wellness for people regardless of any form of status which they may have. This program, the Belhaven Harm Reduction Center, is a government university civil society partnership, or what some people would call a quadruple helix. There's support from government in the sense, we get support from government in terms of the actual building from which we operate, the premises. They are municipal, it is a municipal building, so there are no rates and electricity or rent that we need to pay. We have 24/7 static security, and we work very closely with, amongst other departments, Metro Police and with Safer Cities. Okay, you can continue, sorry. Oh, okay. It has become a place, the Belhaven Harm Reduction Center, of public deliberation and knowledge. We try to have public engagements at least once a month at the center, where people can talk about drugs or any other social issue affecting particularly homeless people. But it has become a place of celebrating what it means to be a homeless person who is able to survive the kinds of circumstances that they are forced to live in. On Monday, I just got a phone call just before the session from Safer Cities in Durban to say that that Safer Cities will be hosting World Homeless Day at this center on Monday. Okay. So what are the benefits of this center for, at this point, DUT? Firstly, I think what the Belhaven Harm Reduction Center has done is it's provided a model for society as a space where one is able to experiment and come up with new solutions to what could be seen as tricky or difficult circumstances or problems. The second one is that there has been significant, and if I say significant, it's an understatement, media publicity around this particular program, both nationally and internationally. At 6:45 this morning, I was on Cape Talk speaking about Belhaven, and I've just been asked if I can do a program on SABC around Belhaven on Monday night at 9:30. But it's a constant source of media publicity attention. We have partnerships with government, local, provincial, and national. National, we work closely with the Department of Social Development. And just by the way, the center was launched by the Deputy Minister of Social Development, but also, of course, with the National Department.
Let's have under 2 minutes left, please.
Okay, sure. Other than that, it has led, of course, to the improvement of quality of life for a very vulnerable population grouping, and therefore utilizing knowledge for public good, as many people have spoken about throughout the last few days. It has been a knowledge hub where people come together, and in being a knowledge hub, it definitely increases the permeability of the university, which is what most universities say they are trying to do through being more engaged. It's allowed for transdisciplinary publications, and I use the word transdisciplinary consciously because we involve practitioners in our disciplinary, cross-disciplinary work that we do. It's received a number of prestigious awards, including the HSRC USAf Inaugural 2020 Team Award, but also an award from the South African Cities Network for being a Good Hood initiative, from DUT, from the Harvard Medical School, and from National Treasury. And lastly, I think that the impact of this engaged project has been to inspire young scholars and to also carve a space for both volunteerism and for student internships. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Marks. I think we just, for that presentation, and I think I've seen very laudatory comments here in terms of the amount of excellent work being done. And we thank you for that. Given the fact that we just have under a minute to wrap up, I don't think you'll be able to answer some of the questions that have been posted here. If you can, in just about a few seconds, please, if you don't mind, how does lack of or reduced funding impact the effectiveness, or have you had such?
One thing, Prof. Vilakazi, if I can, and that is that I think the biggest challenge that we have, we had a session just prior to lunch around whether there should be a separate directorate for engagement in universities or not, or whether engagement should fall under research and teaching and learning. I can say this, we have a real problem within universities in terms of how they are able to fund projects such as this. So this is a project that these projects bring huge credibility to the university, but it's very difficult for the university to actually invest in these projects as part of the university. And I think this is really where we need to start having some really, really critical engagements with universities, local government, and national and provincial governments around how we begin to sustain, to use Tracy-Lynn's word, these types of projects, which are so important.
Thank you very much, Max. I think this is takes us right to the end of today's allotted time. With that, I'd like to thank all speakers for their excellent presentations, and I'm sure that you have received the notifications. I mean, the Q&As, and some of the questions have been partially addressed as well. Sadly, I think we've come to the end of the show. You know, with that, I'd like to thank you all again, and all the best, and hand over to the organizing team. Thank you.